Hello everyone. Hi everyone. Assalamu alaikum. What kind of theory is the theory of natural selection? Some reading from the book What Darwin Got Wrong. Introduction. The Neo-Darwinian theory of evolution, ET for short, has two distinct but related parts. There's a historical account of the genealogy of species, GS for short, and there's the theory of natural selection, NS for short. The main thesis of this book is that NS is irredeemably flawed. However, we have no quarrel to pick with the genealogy of species. It is perfectly possible, in fact entirely likely, that GS is true even if natural selection is not. So the genealogy of species is true even if natural selection is not. We are thus quite prepared to accept, at least for purposes of the discussion to follow, that most or all species are related by historical descent, perhaps by descent from a common primitive ancestor, and that as a rule of thumb, the more similar the phenotypes of two species are, the less remote is the nearest ancestor that they have in common. However, although we take it that GS and NS are independent, we do not suppose that they are unconnected. Think of the GS as a tree, or perhaps a bush, that is composed of nodes and parts. Each node represents a species, and each species is an ancestor of whatever nodes trace back to it. The questions now arise: how did the taxonomy of species get to be the way that it is? What determines which nodes there are and which paths there are between them? In particular, by what process does an ancestor species differentiate into its descendants? There are the questions that Darwin's adaptationism purports to answer. The answer it proposes is that if in the genealogical tree node A traces back to node B, then species B arose from species A by a process of natural selection, NS, and the path between the nodes corresponds to the operation of that process. We will argue that it is pretty clear that this answer is not right. Whatever NS is, it cannot be the mechanism that generates the historical taxonomy of species. Jared Diamond, in his introduction to May 2001, remarks that Darwin didn't just present a well thought out theory of evolution. Most importantly, he also proposed a theory of causation, the theory of natural selection. Well, if we're right, that's exactly what Darwin did not do. Or, if you prefer, Darwin did propose a causal mechanism for the process of speciation, but he got it wrong. In the second place, we want to develop our exposition of Darwin's account of evolution in parallel with an exposition of B.F. Skinner's theory of learning by operant conditioning, OT for short. Some of the similarities between the two have been widely noted, not least by Skinner himself, but we think even so that the strength of the analogy between NS and OT has been seriously underestimated and that its implications have generally been misunderstood. In fact, the two theories are virtually identical. They propose essentially the same mechanisms. They propose essentially the same mechanisms to compute essentially similar functions under essentially identical constraints. This raises a question about which prior discussions of NS have been. It seems to us remarkably reticent. It is pretty generally agreed these days that the Skinnerian account of learning is dead beyond resuscitation. So if it is true that Skinner's theory and Darwin's are variations on the same theme, why aren't the objections that are routinely raised against the former likewise raised against the latter? If nobody believes Skinner anymore, why does everybody still believe Darwin? We're going to argue that the position that retains the second but not the first is not stable.